It's Red Eye Radio. Talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios. For Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, Dan Mandis, this is Red Eye Radio.
866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. Dr. Anthony Fauci, he can't leave well enough alone. He was on with Michael Smerconish, and I'm going to play some audio for you. First of all, Dr. Joe Biden. She has come down with COVID. Of course, you know, there's another strain out there, another variant out there. And as far as I know, I have not seen anybody, getting really, really sick and dying. It looks like, this is just another variant. But, I don't know about you, but I sort of have PTSD on the whole COVID thing. And so I just assume that at some point the government is going to very heavy-handedly again start throwing down mask mandates and shutting us down and locking us down and, shutting down the schools and, wanting to do whatever they can to impact upcoming elections. I mean, I've got this whole PTSD thing in my mind where it just feels like lockdowns are lurking in the shadows. And so whenever I hear the media starting to go down the road of, oh gosh, there's another variant and, the CDC is recommending this. Well, I feel like I know where this is heading. It's like deja vu all over again. Now, a few things. First of all, the last person that anybody should be having on their program is Dr. Anthony Fauci. Knowing what we now know about Dr. Anthony Fauci and how and I don't mean to belabor the point because I know that you folks know this, but he did everything he could to hammer down those people who had differing opinions on his quest, his demand for lockdowns and mandates. And now it turns out, I would say it turns out that he was ultimately wrong on the lockdowns because of what we have seen as far as the impact of those lockdowns on our kids and of society generally speaking. You lock down everybody versus just locking down the sick and the vulnerable. And now looking back, everyone knows that was a mistake. And so now we have another variant that's out there. And again, it doesn't seem to me like this is a variant that is one where we're going to be massively hospitalized and people are dying. This is, as far as I can tell right now, this is not Delta, folks. This is not original COVID, and this is not Delta. This is like a variant, if I'm reading this correctly, this is like a variant of Omicron. And Omicron was one of the variants where it was very easily spread, but it was also far weaker. And that was one of the variants where a lot of us ended up getting, more of that naturalized immunity because we ended up with COVID. And so then we had, of course, the antibodies and so forth. And so, but now that we have this new variant that's out there, you got people that are advocating for mask mandates again. And I heard that and I thought, you've got to be kidding. Really? Mask mandates? And some areas actually are now starting to go down that road. And so Smerconish had Dr. Anthony Fauci on, who, he should be retired. He is retired now. And quite frankly, we shouldn't be having to, watch him on TV yet again. Because I think we've got a little bit of Fauci PTSD. But anyway, this is Fauci, and he's on with Michael Smerconish. And this is part of what he had to say about masks and the effectiveness of masks.
When you're talking about at the population level, that the data are less strong than knowing that if you look on a situation as an individual protecting themselves or protecting them from spreading it, there's no doubt that masks work. Different studies give different percentages of advantage of wearing it, but there's no doubt that the weight of the studies, and there have been many studies, indicate the benefit of wearing masks.
See, I don't know about that because, he talks about the studies. And he talks about, all of the various studies. And, we can sit here and play, my study can beat up your study all day long. There's a study out last week that was all about the N95 masks and about how even people that were wearing the N95 masks were getting sick because of all the bacteria that was building up inside the mask. Not to mention about how these masks, they impacted the growth, the growth of our kids as they were going to school. And it really stunted their growth because they couldn't see the teachers talking. They couldn't effectively communicate. They were having trouble hearing. So ultimately the question is, did the masks work? And on the one hand, maybe there's studies out there that say, oh, absolutely the masks worked. Well, those are probably the people that were advocating for the mask mandates. But there's other people out there that are saying, no, the masks, not only did they not work, they did more harm than good. Because it impacted the growth of our kids. It impacted their ability to learn and their ability to learn how to communicate. And so Fauci, now he is, once again, please, for the love of all that is holy, please do not have Fauci out there making the rounds on TV again. But I love what Smerconish did, and I like Michael Smerconish. He asked him about one of these latest studies, I think it's called the Cochrane study, that shows that masks did not work. The Cochrane study, and they say that it is an exhaustive study on the efficacy of masks. And he hit Fauci with it right between the eyes.
I'm going to refer to one of them. You've heard about it before. I heard about it from a number of radio callers. Brett Stevens in the Times talked about Cochrane. Put that on the screen. The most rigorous and comprehensive analysis of scientific studies conducted on the efficacy of masks for reducing the spread of respiratory illness, including COVID-19, was published last month. Its conclusions, said Tom Jefferson, the Oxford epidemiologist who is the lead author, were unambiguous. There is just no evidence that masks, make any difference. He told the journalist Mayan Damasi, full stop. But wait, hold on. What about the N95 masks as opposed to the lower quality surgical or cloth masks? Makes no difference. None of it, he said. Well, what about the studies that initially persuaded policymakers to impose mask mandates? They were convinced by non-randomized studies, flawed observational studies. How do we get beyond that finding of that particular review?
I mean, that was 55 seconds. Where you've got Michael Smerconish and he's telling Dr. Anthony Fauci, this is what the studies are showing regarding masks. Yet here you are again, Dr. Fauci is, of course, making the rounds. And a lot of the folks out there that worship masks, they are. And by the way, just so we're clear, if you want to wear a mask, please go wear a mask. I don't care. I'm all about self-choice. I'm all about you want to wear a mask, personal choice. You want to wear a mask, go wear a mask. You know, I can't believe that even in 2023, when you say that you should, do your own research, you're still castigated as somebody who is a conspiracy theorist and you want people to die. And didn't we have enough of that during COVID? And so Smerconish just threw down 55 seconds of this exhaustive study, Cochrane, where it shows, and this is from back in March, where it shows that these masks simply did not work. Listen to how Fauci spins this.
Yeah, but there are other studies, Michael, that show at an individual level for individual. When you're talking about the effect on the epidemic or the pandemic as a whole, the data are less strong. But when you talk about as an individual basis of someone protecting themselves or protecting themselves from spreading it to others, there's no doubt that there are many studies that show that there is an advantage. When you took at the broad population level, like the Cochrane study, the data are less firm with regard to the effect on the overall pandemic.
I don't see, this is driving me nuts. I've listened to this 5 times. And the question and the topic for discussion is, because here's the deal. Mask mandates, because of the COVID PTSD that a lot of us have. We hear about another variant out there, and you see that some of these various places are starting to throw down the conversations regarding mask mandates. And he is saying, and just to try to drill this down a little bit, what he is saying is, well, I can't tell you. It doesn't look like we have a lot of evidence that shows that the masks had any kind of an impact during the pandemic. But on an individual basis, they show that, yeah, the masks did work on an individual basis. Well, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. So if an individual decided that he wanted to wear a mask, let that individual wear a mask. But the discussion has got to be who was truthful, who was right, because if it happens again, we need to listen to people that are less like Dr. Anthony Fauci and listen to people who were more open-minded and honest about the impacts of, for example, the lockdowns. You know, if you listen to me in Nashville on Super Talk 99.7, WTN, I host the morning show here in Music City. And people here in Nashville will tell you that I refer to the Great Barrington Project all the time, because that, at least for me, is emblematic of everything that is wrong with Dr. Anthony Fauci. Because you had scientists that were out there, very respected scientists, who called into question, said, pump the brakes, hold on. We cannot simply lock down the entire nation, because that will lead to all kinds of societal issues. And Dr. Anthony Fauci shut them down. He destroyed their reputations. He discredited them. He did everything he could to shut down conversation. And those doctors, those very respected scientists, once Dr. Anthony Fauci got done with them, their reputations were in tatters. But now that we're, a couple of years past COVID, and we now know that the people that were screaming at the top of their lungs, do not shut down society, do not shut down our economy, don't shut our kids inside, don't shut down their schools, don't shut down their activities. Those people, although during COVID they were disparaged as wanting to kill people. People were dying, the media said. People are dying, Dr. Anthony Fauci said. And that was true. That was true. People were dying. But the answer was not shutting down all of society. The answer, at least to me, should not have been shutting down the healthy and forcing the healthy inside. Because now what you did is you've made for some who were healthy, they're now unhealthy in the sense that they have the lingering psychological effects and impacts of those lockdowns. And so do our kids. And so for Fauci to sit here and say, well, there's less evidence that the mask mandates, had an impact on the pandemic, but from an individual standpoint, sure, the masks worked. I get what he's saying, but the reality is that the conversation has got to be about the mask mandates by and large, and their impacts on society, because we could possibly be heading there again. So we have to talk about it in the broadest of senses, because that's what he did when he, and I'm going to tell you, it was Trump, when they encouraged and they recommended and they wanted those mask mandates in place. So that should be the conversation that we continue to have. 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339.
The first look at 2023 almond production released recently by USDA indicates California's 2023 almond production on a shelled basis is forecast at 2.6 billion pounds, up 1% from last season's crop.
With USDA agricultural economist Catherine Weber reminding us that California is both the sole U.S. almond producer and grower of 80% of the world's almond crop.
If realized, 2023 almond production would be the third largest on record behind 2020 and 2021.
As far as factors behind the almond crop production estimate,
while water availability was a minor concern this year, unseasonably cold temperatures and stormy weather conditions during almond bloom negatively impacted pollination. While the preliminary 2023 yield estimate is down 1% from last year, bearing acres are estimated to reach a record-breaking 1.38 million, a 30,000 acre increase from 2022.
I'm Ron Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This report is made possible by Cenex Roadmaster XL Premium Diesel and Citgo Lubricants.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
Appreciate you listening on Red Eye Radio. 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number. Kevin is calling from Nashville on Red Eye Radio. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Dad.
How are you, my friend? Go ahead,
Hi,
sir.
Dan.
I'm good.
Well, I was listening earlier, and the gentleman that was talking about Chris Christie, that was his guy.
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself that during the primaries is the time that you need to protest. That's when you go all in on the candidate that you want. But if that candidate does not make it into the final cut, you got to, even if you have to hold your nose, you got to get behind the person who's there. Don't hand an election to somebody else because you want to sit at home because you're having sour grapes. You got your feelings hurt.
Hey, Kevin. So let me ask you: Are you a Trump supporter?
Yes, sir. I do support Trump, but I would also vote for Ramaswamy, or I would vote for DeSantis.
Would you vote for Chris Christie? Would you vote? Let me ask you this: Would you vote for Chris Christie, even though he has been one of Trump's biggest critics?
Yes, sir. I had to hold my nose and vote for John McCain.
Oh.
So yeah, I could do it. I might not want to, but
ultimately, what I would say, Kevin, I appreciate the call. What I would say is that for Republicans, I think Gary and Eric actually said this, for Republicans, any Republican running in the primary right now would be better than Joe Biden. I think that is clear. Let's say hello to, very quickly, Adam is in Kalamazoo, Michigan on Red Eye Radio. Hey, Kevin, I should say Adam. Hey, Adam, how are you?
I'm doing all right. I happen to be a truck driver, so but as a person who's asthmatic, the mask mandates do not work, and I refuse to wear a mask. And on top of that, I caught COVID back when they were calling it a mysterious upper respiratory infection.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, there was many news stories done about this mysterious upper respiratory infection before they started calling it COVID. And I believe I picked it up out of the Chicago area, which happens to have a direct link to China with the airports.
Right. Well, and the thing is, and Adam, I appreciate the call. And Adam's reacting to some audio that I played of Dr. Anthony Fauci out there, and he's, people are reacting to what he said because there have been now a number of different studies, and this was an interview that he gave, I guess it was over the 3-day weekend, where he was talking about, mask mandates and how he certainly does hope that people mask up again if they are suggested or recommended. And part of the conversation has to be, how much credibility, if any, does Dr. Anthony Fauci have? And, people are looking at some of these various studies that simply have shown that the mask mandates did not work.
Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios. Now, for Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, here is Dan Mandis.
Appreciate you being here. The phone number is 866-90 Red Eye, 866-907-3339. Way back in the early, I think it was the first hour of the program, I was talking about this. And I do find it interesting because there's some, I don't know what you call them, polls, studies, whatever, that Americans are dreading the election of 2024. Now, when you talk about dreading an election, part of what I want to know is what exactly is it that you're dreading? I mean, listen, I understand that we all went through a lot in 2020. I mean, certainly we're in the middle of COVID. People are arguing about changing election rules. I mean, all these things are going on. Joe Biden lying about the laptop from hell. I mean, trust me when I say, I mean, it kind of goes back to the last segment where I was talking about how we all have PTSD regarding COVID. And by the way, somebody found me. If you want to find me on social media, at Dan Mandis Show on both Facebook and Twitter, you can send me private messages there if you so choose. But, Guy, I wrapped up the last segment talking about how Dr. Anthony Fauci is certainly not one to be trusted. Because he is, of course, the guy that advocated for and really did demand, you know, things like vaccination mandates and mask mandates, while doing everything he could to stifle any kind of dissenting opinion. And again, Fauci is the last guy of all the people to have on for any kind of an interview regarding COVID or whatever. Fauci would be the last guy that I would call. Why? Because he has no credibility, folks. But see, I think part of what's going on is, and you're going to see Fauci, he's going to be on, you know, MSNBC, and he's going to be on CNN. He's going to be on all the different channels, Dr. Anthony Fauci, because he's an easy get and he's a name. But does he have any credibility left at this point? I don't see that he does. I mean, certainly not from what we already know about Fauci and what he did, again, to stifle dissenting opinion. And also regarding the whole situation with China. And about how it at least looks like it to me, and it looks like to a lot of other people, that COVID escaped one way or another from that lab in China. Not to mention the fact that the NIH under Fauci basically paid for the gain-of-function research through that third party. And so a good part of what was going on, and you know, Rand Paul has gone round and round with Fauci on all of this. But, you know, Fauci has said many, many times that the COVID did not escape from that Wuhan lab. As a matter of fact, he said some awfully disparaging things about people who bought into that, which was at one time called the conspiracy theory, now not so much. But the whole point is that people apparently, according to some, are dreading the election of 2024. Here's what they say. This is from the Associated Press. Chris Borick, political science professor at Muhlenberg College, said he is not surprised by what people are saying about the election coming up. And he has actually seen evidence of it in the indexes of polling, saying there is absolute fatigue amongst the American people regarding politics right now, is his quote. It's been in many ways a brutal stretch for the country in terms of politics. And for many, many Americans, there's not excitement or energy approaching 2024. It's more dread. And, you know, I read that. It's more dread. And I'm here to tell you that I couldn't feel more optimistic about 2024. And see, here's the reason why. Is because I do feel, and I know a lot of you folks out there, you know, going to call BS on the guest host here, but I truly believe that the American people are becoming more and more aware of Joe Biden and his, one, his crimes, his influence peddling, but also his lies and the lies that he told during the last election. And so I do believe that ultimately he is going to be held accountable, because Donald Trump, as I've said many times, he can now go on to, the world's greatest I Told You So tour. And he can. Because it was Joe Biden who said many, many times that he didn't know anything about Hunter Biden's overseas business dealings. We now know that to be a bald-faced lie. We also know that the laptop from hell, which is, of course, as everyone knows, Joe Biden said it was a Russian plant, had all those 51 national intelligence officials, both parties, Joe Biden said, they say this has all the earmarks of Russian disinformation. Turned out it was real. And Joe Biden knew it. Now, the question is whether it is Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis or anyone else, will they or the media call out Joe Biden? You see, because I guarantee you, as Congress is getting ready to head back into Washington, D.C., they're going to be talking about two things. They're going to be talking about, yet another continuing resolution to avoid a government shutdown, which I don't even bother to cover anymore because, quite frankly, it's all just a shell game. And they like to talk about that all the time. Hand-wringing media. Oh, no, the government's going to shut down. How do we avoid a government shutdown? Just stop it already. The government rarely, if ever, shuts down, and when it does, it's not a big deal. So all the hyperbole from the media about, the hand-wringing and this supposed government shutdown, I love all of the hand-wringing regarding a government shutdown, because the government then will not be able to borrow any more money. And the thing is that when you talk about a government shutdown and you talk about how, that means that we're not going to be able to borrow any more money, that means that we're not going to be able to spend any more money, or we're not going to be able to spend as much money. I wish that the media, I wish that the politicians, I wish that this president and past presidents, I wish that they had as much concern about their ongoing obscene spending as they were doing the ongoing obscene spending, as opposed to heading into a congressional session where they're not, whether they're looking down the barrel of a possible government shutdown, and so they won't be able to spend any more money. I wish they were as concerned when they were spending the money when they didn't need to spend that much money. But the only time anybody ever seems to give a crap is when they might have to shut down the government and they won't be able to spend that money. I mean, how nice would it be if we had, more than just a handful of conservatives, more than a handful of Republicans that would raise up their hands and say, you know what, shut it down. Because we've been spending way too much money, not only Democrats, but Republicans too. It's both sides. And so now here we are, we're going to be, subjected to Janet Yellen and all these other folks from the Biden administration, and they're going to really be worried because they're not going to be able to borrow any more money. That was one of the things that we were talking about, it was months ago now, when there was this whole big debate about raising the debt ceiling. Remember that whole thing? And Janet Yellen actually came out and said, well, if we don't do that, we can't borrow any more money. Are you kidding me? We can't pay back the money that we've already borrowed, and you want to borrow more. I'm not dreading the next election. I'm dreading politics in general until the day that I die, because my children and my grandchildren will never be able to pay off the debt that our government, both parties, is accruing. And nobody seems to care. And the supposed purveyors of truth in this country, the media, all they'll focus on is a possible shutdown. But they won't talk about how we got to this moment and how what is going on right now continues to contribute to the train wreck that is America's economy. I mean, friends, we could go down the situation with Ukraine. We could go down, all of the different spending packages. We could talk about the Pentagon, where every single year the Pentagon seems to lose billions of dollars. They don't know where it is. They fail the audits every single year. Yet nobody cares. Nobody in Washington, D.C. cares. Don't look too close. Don't ask too many questions. We'll call you names. And that's part of what's going on. That's part of what's going on in this election cycle. And so politics, yeah, you know what? It has been a brutal stretch for the country in terms of politics. Going back to this, Chris Borick, political science professor at Muhlenberg College, says he's not surprised by what people are saying, and he's actually seen evidence of it in the indexes of polling. There is absolute fatigue amongst the American people regarding politics right now. He says that it's been like this for quite some time. It's been, in many ways, a brutal stretch for the country in terms of politics. Well, can I tell you what's been a brutal stretch for the country in terms of politics? It hasn't been put this in air quotes, it hasn't been the politics. It's been the policies of the politicians that are currently in place and are currently in power. I mean, that's what's been the brutal stretch. Whether you want to talk about vaccine mandates, you want to talk about mask mandates, you want to talk about wide open borders, you want to talk about, the situation. And by the way, again, for the mask and the vaccine mandates, that's both parties. And Republicans could have fixed the border. Finally, Trump was able to get to it on his second term when he got more of a majority. But here's the deal, is that for the Republicans, they have had the opportunity to fix a lot of things for a lot of years, and they simply refuse to do it. Donald Trump, he wanted to build that wall. Unfortunately, he didn't have a cooperative Congress. And the beat goes on. And so when this guy says, when Chris Borick says that it's been a brutal stretch for the country in terms of politics, well, it's been a brutal stretch for the country when it comes to the economy. They say there's no excitement or energy approaching 2024. It's more dread, he says, and part of that dread, people telling this journalist, is the constant news about a probable presidential rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, not just a replay of one of the most vitriolic presidential races in modern history, and which the loser has still, this is quoting, has still refused to admit that he lost, but also a reminder of a year that was pretty awful for most Americans. Well, it was awful for most Americans. But it wasn't the politics that we've been dealing with. It's been the policies of those politicians that continue to do what they do, not for the American people, but to the American people. And that's why I am really looking forward to 2024 to change out those politicians who have been implementing those horrible policies on we, the American people. 866-90-RED has a phone number, 866-907-3339.
Get in touch with Red Eye Radio, toll free at 866-90-RED-EYE.
Eight 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis in for Gary and Eric. They returned Sunday night, Monday morning, and a lot of people making a very big deal, and they should, about this Wall Street Journal poll Donald Trump is expanding his dominating lead for the Republican presidential nomination, among other things. A new Wall Street Journal poll finds GOP primary voters overwhelmingly see his 4 criminal prosecutions as lacking merit, and about half say the indictments fuel their support for him. That's not surprising, folks. The new survey finds that what was once a 2-man race for the nomination for the GOP has now collapsed into a lopsided contest in which the former President Donald Trump, for now, has no real formidable challenger. DeSantis is falling, Trump is rising, and nobody else really comes close.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One.